Marcos Ambrose looked to join two of NASCAR's all-time greats with a victory on Sunday, August 11th of 2013. It was a day where Marcos Ambrose made navigating Watkins Glen look effortless as he absolutely dominated the first half of this race. All it took was issues with his own teammate and dirty air to completely derail the chance of Marcos Ambrose completing the three-peat at Watkins Glen. NRF Productions presents how Marcos Ambrose lost the 2013 Watkins Glen race. Mark Martin, Jeff Gordon, and Marcos Ambrose? Okay, so in what universe does saying those names make any sense outside of talking about a pileup at Talladega? Should Marcos Ambrose win this race, he was going to be in an elite category with those respected NASCAR drivers, having won 3 consecutive Watkins Glen NASCAR Cup Series races. Plus, Ambrose would continue his streak of 5 consecutive seasons with at least 1 win at Watkins Glen, a streak that dated all the way back to 2008 when he won a race in the then NASCAR Nationwide Series at the track. Bringing Marcos Ambrose back down to reality, his 2013 NASCAR Cup Series season was a disappointment. He didn't perform like he had hoped on the ovals, and really this race was his last hurrah to try to get one of the 2 wildcard spots considering his abysmal season. As for the race, the 2013 Cheez-It 355 was going to be a race on strategy. The popular strategy to get the victory would be a 3-stop race. In fact, this is how Marcos Ambrose won the 2011 and 2012 runnings. And like in those 2 races, Marcos Ambrose reiterated as the ESPN in-race reporter that the 2 guys he was most worried about were Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski. Kyle Busch was in position to win on the final lap before he got into the oil and spun out in 2012. Brad Keselowski, meanwhile, was simply outdueled by Marcos Ambrose in those 2 runnings. So Keselowski had something to race for. Marcos Ambrose was trying to defend it. Not to mention he would have some fellow road race experts like AJ Allmendinger getting his best cup opportunity of his redemption tour to this point. Max Papis subbing in for 3-time NASCAR champion Tony Stewart, who is still recuperating from a season-ending sprint car crash. Plus you got the Start and Park legend Michael McDowell making his first start for Front Row Motorsports. So NASCAR fans were rightly anticipating the start of this race, and as the 43 cars came out of turn 11 and took the green flag, we were racing in New York. Even though things seemed tame in the beginning, especially on this short run, the word of the day at Watkins Glen was going to be aggressive. Compared to Sonoma, the only other road course on the NASCAR schedule, this was a road course where you could afford to be aggressive, really push the issue with the race car. It's the main reason why this track has a resume of great racing and great finishes. However, with the potential reward, there's always a risk that comes with pushing the edge, pushing that gray area just a little bit. And the consequences would be even more so with this brand new Generation 6 car. So when you compare this car to the car of tomorrow, the Gen 6 had a lot more downforce compared to the older car. So right off the bat, you could tell it was going to be hard to pass. Jeff Gordon learned that the hard way. A completely rare choke on his end brought out the second yellow and completely traumatized a 12-year-old boy watching this race on television. And I feel sorry for that kid. Add in a yellow from David Rudiman after he broke the engine due to missing a shift. We really didn't know who the contenders were going to be until we got to a longer run. Finally, when the race got back to green, we would find out, as we would see as the run went on, how the drivers would adapt now that handling made more of a difference. Because of that, the cat was officially out of the bag, or should I say the Tasmanian devil. Tasmania, Australia was where Marcos Ambrose grew up, and it was a small little island with real-life dog-like devils. This is how Marcos Ambrose got his famous racing nickname. Look, if you had two eyeballs, whether you were watching on television or in the grandstands, you could tell the 9 did the best job of anyone at driving further into the corner. The ESPN team marveled over the effortless driving and smooth shift work of Marcos Ambrose. Here's what they didn't take into account, and that is the fact that this was going to be a long, grueling race. Marcos Ambrose and Drew Blickensderfer understood this, and they knew they couldn't get complacent at any time. There's a reason why their competitors on the box, like Paul Wolfe and Dave Rogers, can eat good in the neighborhood after these races. They work with their drivers, Brad Keselowski and Kyle Busch, respectively, to adjust their cars to make them better by the time the pay window opens and the trophy is on the line. On lap 40, the S's, shaped like a slithering rattlesnake, would bite 4 competitors, including Victor Gonzalez Jr., who was now leaking oil. Alan Bestwick in the booth knew this was going to be trouble now that the 36 was leaking oil, and he pleaded, please, please do not drag this car around.
Don't drive that one around, please. Please. Well, here we go.
Yep, there you can see the oil stream just coming out. That's a big mess.
Did it work though? To an extent, yes, because the team had to scream over the radio, stop, you're gonna leak oil all over the racetrack.
Yeah, stop.
Under the caution, Drew Blickensderfer reminded him of the strategy and told him to save, as if he were someone that was looking for financial advice after the Great Recession. The one player that both Ambrose and Blickensderfer were the most worried about was that 18. ESPN shortly would play some dialogue between Kyle Busch and Dave Rogers, and you could tell still that Marcos Ambrose and this number 9, they were on a completely different track than these guys.
I'm trying to figure out where I'm getting beat by him. I mean, he's just driving away from me. I can't even keep up with him.
So the green flag comes back out. The 9 immediately clears everyone. The 18 passes the 29 for second. And ultimately, Kyle Busch has some grill issues that would derail him away from being able to challenge Marcos Ambrose. So was there anything that could derail Marcos Ambrose and the 9 from winning Watkins Glen again? Yes, there would, and perhaps in the most frustrating manner, as the 43, which was the second Richard Petty Motorsports entry in this race, would have issues on lap 60. For some reason, Eric Almirola's car went bizarrely straight into the tire barrier while trying to navigate the outer loop. This was the worst case scenario for Richard Petty Motorsports and Marcos Ambrose, because now the 9 was still out there on the racetrack while several contenders, the 18, the 2, the 56, they had already made their final pit stop of the race. This meant that Marcos Ambrose wouldn't have the track position, as he would come down and make his final pit stop of the race under caution. Knowing that the 9 would be back in traffic, Drew Blickensderfer called for one round on the track bar to try to aid Ambrose in his climb back through the field. While Kyle Busch was in the clean air, Marcos Ambrose would restart this race in 14th. Marcos Ambrose tried hard, even going 3 wide on the restart. However, the best he could do was 11th. Marcos Ambrose reiterated to the team his car was horrible in traffic, he couldn't pass. And just like that, Marcos Ambrose, the driver that led 51 laps of this race, he was untouchable. Now, this car that everyone thought was so dominant was just another car. He now just casually blended into the mid-pack like every single week on ovals. It was evident now that Marcos Ambrose needed a caution to get back into this race. Kyle Busch, on the other hand, hoped and prayed there would not be a single yellow on the racetrack with 13 laps to go.
Let's just see this baby go green. Come on, go green.
Not even 1 lap after he said this.
There goes the tire casing.
Which then rolls around the inner loop and gets collected by Alex Kennedy in the 19 car.
Assuming this would be the final restart, Marcos Ambrose knew what he needed to do from the 11th position. He needed to be as elite on the racetrack as Adam Wainwright was on the mound. And yes, I'm obviously talking about 2013 Adam Wainwright, because I don't even want to touch on how he's been pitching as I'm recording this video. Driving like his life depended on it, Marcos Ambrose threaded the needle in between the 11 and the 20. What this would do was make things chaotic going into the rattlesnake-like S's, where now the 20 was on the back bumper of the 9, almost got into him and ended his entire day. Instead, Matt Kenseth drifted into the 5, and this rattlesnake would sink its fangs into some more contenders. Matt Kenseth, obviously, Casey Kane, and Dale Earnhardt Jr., who desperately needed a good points day to remain in the top 10. At least for Marcos Ambrose, he survived the S's for now. On what was supposed to be the final restart of the race, the number 9 would line up 10th with 7 laps to go. Could Marcos Ambrose pull off the Dale Jr. 2001 of Watkins Glen by sailing through the field, passing 9 cars to make sure that he would three-peat yet again? Well, on the restart, Marcos Ambrose did not get going. He drifted up the racetrack. Marcos Ambrose was in a vulnerable spot, and the rattlesnake saw this. NASCAR fans could only watch in real time as the rattlesnake sunk its fangs into Marcos Ambrose, injecting him with the poison that would kill him off from the 2013 Cheez-It 355.
Oh, Ambrose turned in the S's, same spot on the track. Caution's out.
It was in the rattlesnake S's where Marcos Ambrose angrily got out of the car and conceded his bid at a Watkins Glen three-peat. It turns out there was more to this story, as Marcos Ambrose was dealing with potential suspension issues, which I'm not 100% sure is true or not, but this was possibly the same issue that caused the 43 to DNF out of the race earlier. For Marcos Ambrose, it just bit him right at the end of the race. For Marcos Ambrose to come into Watkins Glen with all the hype around him, win the pole, dominate the race, and crash out in a heartbreaking fashion. This is definitely a race that the Australian doesn't think twice about when recollecting on the times he had at Watkins Glen. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I've got plenty of full tank NASCAR content that's out and that's coming out in the future, so be sure to stay tuned. And other than that, this is Nathan for Digital Gashouse. Life's a beach, and then you drive.